What if the teacher you fired for protecting a poor child became the only hope your entire school had left? Molly Gaynor had spent over a decade teaching at Willow Creek Elementary, tucked away in a busy urban district that prized test scores over human hearts. Every morning, she arrived before dawn with her battered canvas bag stuffed with old books, homemade worksheets, and little rewards for the children: stickers, pencils, bright erasers she bought out of her own dwindling paycheck. She never sought praise, never asked for attention. Her joy was in the light that sparked in a child's eyes when they read their first sentence alone, or solved a math problem they'd sworn they'd never understand. But in the teacher's lounge, Molly was considered soft, weak, they whispered, always taking the troubled kids under her wing, always sticking her nose where it didn't belong, always crying at staff meetings when someone mentioned budget cuts or students going hungry. The principal, Ms. Sanderson, barely disguised her impatience whenever Molly spoke up at faculty meetings. "We're here to teach, not parent," she would snap, tapping her pen against the desk. "This is not a charity organization." Molly tried to push on, swallowing her bitterness, focusing on her students, especially those like Emery Brooks. He was 8, small and painfully thin, with wide eyes and calloused hands that trembled when he held a pencil. His father was gone, his mother in and out of shelters, and Emery came to school each day in the same threadbare sweater, clutching a plastic bag with 2 pieces of bread. The other children noticed. They whispered and giggled. They shoved him in the hallway, called him Dumpster Boy. And one frigid morning, Molly walked out into the schoolyard and found 3 bigger boys holding Emery's face in the snow, grinding it in while he choked and coughed, his breath coming out in ragged gasps. Something inside Molly snapped. She lunged at them, tore their hands away, screaming so loud the recess monitors froze in place. She pulled Emery against her chest, shielding his tiny body with her own as the other boys ran. When she brought Emery into the nurse's office, his lips were blue. He could barely speak. And Molly refused to leave his side. Later that afternoon, Miss Sanderson summoned her. The office smelled of stale coffee and scented candles that did nothing to hide the cold sterility of the place. Miss Sanderson's voice was clipped and practiced, as though she had rehearsed this conversation many times. "You crossed a line today," she began, staring at Molly with eyes that held no warmth. "You put your hands on students. That is grounds for immediate termination. You know that." Molly's voice trembled. "They were hurting him. He could have—" "That is for staff to handle," Miss Sanderson cut her off sharply. "You do not physically intervene. And this attachment you have to that boy, it's unhealthy. You are not his mother, Ms. Gaynor. You are not here to save him. You're here to teach." Molly tried to argue, but the principal slid a paper across the desk, a termination notice, effective immediately. Her ears roared. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the pen when Miss Sanderson told her to sign. She walked out into the cold afternoon with her belongings in a cardboard box. Her classroom, her children, the life she had built, all ripped away in 15 minutes. She looked back once through the tall glass doors, hoping maybe Emery would come running. But there was no one. Just the echo of her own footsteps fading into the bitter wind. And for the first time in her life, Molly wondered if maybe, just maybe, the world was right about her. That she cared too much. That she was weak. That the fight was already lost. After Molly left Willow Creek Elementary, the world seemed to shrink around her. She spent the first few days sitting at her kitchen table, staring at the piles of lesson plans and handmade charts she'd once proudly displayed on her classroom walls. The room felt hollow, like an abandoned stage after the audience had left. The phone rang sometimes, but it was never the call she needed. It was creditors, reminding her about the mortgage payments. It was her mother's nurse, warning that the medication bill was overdue again. Molly tried to find another teaching job, sending out dozens of resumes, each one tailored and polished, but news of her dismissal had spread quietly through the district. She was that teacher now, the one who lost control, the one who let her emotions interfere. Without steady work, Molly took whatever odd jobs she could find. She spent evenings shelving books at a dusty used bookstore on Jefferson Street, where the owner barely spoke to her and the register was older than half the books on the shelves. During the day, she answered ads for temp work, delivering groceries, sorting mail, sometimes cleaning houses for people who wouldn't even look her in the eye. Everywhere she went, she felt like she was moving through glass, transparent, fragile, about to shatter at the slightest touch. At night, she dreamed of her students. In the dreams, Emery was always there, standing in the cold, with frost clinging to his hair, looking up at her with eyes that begged for help. She would wake gasping, the sheets damp with sweat. She tried to find him, calling social services, but they wouldn't release information. "We're sorry," they said, their voices hollow and bureaucratic. "We can't discuss the placement of minors." Molly started selling her old teaching materials online. Boxes of children's books, math games, laminated charts. Each time she taped up another package, it felt like burying a piece of herself. One rainy Tuesday, while she was restocking shelves at the bookstore, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it at first, assuming it was another bill collector. But something nudged her to check. It was a text from Juno Lanier, a friend from her college days. They hadn't spoken in years, but Juno's name still sparked a faint warmth in Molly's chest. Memories of late-night study sessions and idealistic conversations about saving the world one child at a time. The message was short. "Molly, are you still looking for a teaching job? I have something. Call me ASAP." Her hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She stepped out into the alley behind the store, rain dripping from the awning, and called. Juno picked up on the first ring. "Molly," she said breathlessly, "listen, I don't have much time. I'm working at Sunrise Elementary out in Barrow Hill. We just got a new principal. His name is Larson Trial. He's different, Molly. He actually listens. He cares. We need someone in the resource room, someone who's patient and knows how to handle the tough kids. I told him about you. He wants to meet you tomorrow if you can come." Molly gripped the phone so tight her knuckles went white. "But I don't have a car, and I'm not sure I can—" "Molly," Juno interrupted softly, "I know what happened to you. I know you think it broke you, but this place, it might be what you need, what they need." Molly stared up at the gray sky, the rain washing over her face like a baptism. For the first time in months, a flicker of something like hope moved through her chest. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll be there." When she ended the call, she wiped her face on her sleeve, unsure if the wetness was rain or tears. She looked up at the battered neon sign above the bookstore door, then back at the street where puddles reflected the passing headlights. Tomorrow, a new chance, a new school, a place where maybe, just maybe, she could find herself again. And somewhere deep inside, Molly swore to herself that this time, she wouldn't let anyone rip it away. The morning Molly arrived in Barrow Hill, the fog clung to the earth like a secret. It was the kind of quiet town that people often pass through without noticing. Wooden fences leaning with age, sleepy gas stations with hand-painted signs, and front porches where old men watched the world through clouds of coffee steam. Sunrise Elementary stood at the edge of town, nestled between a patch of tall pines and a dried-up creek bed. The building itself looked nothing like the concrete boxes Molly was used to in the city. It was modest, built from brick and wood with large windows that reflected the early morning sky. There was something old-fashioned about it, warm, real. She stepped out of the borrowed pickup truck. Juno's husband had insisted she take it for the interview, and adjusted the collar of her coat. Her hands trembled slightly, not just from the chill, but from fear. This could be the beginning of everything again, or the end of the last flicker of hope she had left. Inside, the school smelled of pencil shavings and old books, but it didn't have that suffocating sterility she'd come to expect. Instead, laughter echoed faintly down the hallways, and someone had written a quote in cursive on the wall near the front office. "Every child is one caring adult away from being a success story." Her eyes watered unexpectedly. A receptionist with honey-colored hair greeted her kindly and led her down a quiet corridor toward the principal's office. On the way, Molly saw children lining up for recess, teachers chatting in open doorways, and handmade posters covering the walls with phrases like, "You matter here," and "Try again, you're getting there." Then she saw him. Larson Trial stood outside his office door, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He was tall, with a thick beard peppered with silver, and a calm intensity in his eyes. He had been speaking gently to a second grader, holding a crumpled piece of paper. When he saw Molly, he gave the child a small fist bump and sent him back to class. "Molly Gaynor," he said, offering a strong handshake. "You're already late. 3 years late, to be exact. We've needed someone like you since I got here." She laughed nervously, but he didn't smile as a formality. His eyes actually sparkled. His office looked more like a den than an administrative command center. There were books everywhere. Real books, not binders. A guitar leaned against the wall. A beanbag sat in the corner under a window that let the morning light pour in. He gestured for her to sit. "I've read about you," he said. "Juno told me the official story, but I'm not interested in that. I want your version." Molly hesitated. Do you already know why I was fired? I know the district spin. I want the truth. So she told him everything, the bullying, the coldness of the administration, the way Emery had looked when she pulled him from the snow, the hopelessness that came after. Her voice cracked halfway through, and she looked down at her hands, ashamed. But when she finally looked up, Larson wasn't scribbling notes or checking the time. He was listening like it was sacred. You were punished for having a spine, he said simply. That won't happen here. She blinked. Excuse me? I don't hire people to follow rules blindly. I hire people to do what's right, even when it's hard. He paused. I have a class that no one wants, the resource group. Kids with trauma, behavioral issues, learning gaps so wide, you could lose yourself inside them. The last teacher lasted 5 weeks. And you think I'm the one for it? She asked, incredulous. I know you are, he said without hesitation. Molly sat very still, as though afraid to breathe. Why me? Because when a child was bleeding in the snow, you didn't look for a form or a protocol. You ran. And those kids in that room, they don't need more forms. They need someone who runs. Silence hung between them, heavy and fragile. I'll do it, she said softly. Good, he replied, standing. Come meet them. They'll know if you're faking it. He led her through a back hallway to a door marked Room 7, Support and Growth. Inside, 5 children sat at separate tables, each absorbed in something different. One scribbled in a sketchbook. Another stared out. The window, two were quietly arguing over a puzzle. A 5th boy sat with headphones on, eyes closed. The room didn't look like a classroom. It looked like a safe place. When the door opened, none of the children looked up. Not one. Larson nudged her forward. They'll test you every day, but if you stay, they'll show you who they really are. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, and for the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, Molly Gaynor didn't feel lost. She felt like she was walking back into herself, one slow, careful step at a time. Molly spent the first week in Room 7 observing more than teaching. The children hardly acknowledged her presence, their eyes darting away whenever she looked at them. They were like small, wounded animals, half expecting a blow at any moment. Larson had warned her. They would not trust easily. And he was right. Cassidy Hope, a delicate girl with auburn hair chopped unevenly, sat by the window every day, clutching a small, stuffed rabbit so dirty and threadbare it barely resembled any animal at all. She never spoke, not even to the other kids, and flinched whenever Molly moved too quickly. Dexter Vaughn was a puzzle of contradictions. Brilliant in math, able to solve complex equations in his head, but prone to explosive outbursts that left books torn and pencils snapped. His voice was loud, but behind his sharp words, Molly saw the flicker of panic, like he was drowning and trying to claw his way to the surface. The other children had their own shadows. Arlo, who hid under tables whenever someone laughed too loud. May, who obsessively sorted beads into jars, whispering numbers under her breath. And then there was the boy in the corner. He had arrived late on the 3rd day, clutching a battered backpack, eyes narrowed as though daring the world to hurt him again. Molly had been at the board, pinning up a new chart of classroom rules, when she heard the door creak and turned, her breath caught in her throat. Emery Brooks. She hadn't seen him in over a year. He was taller, but still thin, his arms just as bony. The haunted look in his eyes still there, only deeper now, etched into his skin. He didn't say a word as the aide guided him to a desk in the back. He dropped his bag to the floor and sat, arms crossed over his chest like a barrier. Molly felt her heart clench so hard it hurt. She wanted to run to him, to wrap him in her arms, to apologize for not being there when he needed her most. But she couldn't. Larson's words echoed in her head. They'll test you, but if you stay, they'll show you who they really are. So she stayed where she was. That night, she didn't sleep. Memories flooded back. Emery coughing up snow in the nurse's office, his tiny hands clutching hers, the look in his eyes when they'd taken him away. Had he thought she abandoned him? Had he hated her for leaving? The next morning, she packed a little notebook with a bright blue cover and wrote his name on it in careful letters. She placed it gently on his desk before he arrived, hoping he'd see it as an invitation, not a trap. When Emery came in, he eyed the notebook, then glared at her as though she'd insulted him. He shoved it into his bag without a word. It felt like a slap, but Molly forced herself to smile and keep teaching. Over the next days, she offered him small kindnesses. A new pencil, a soft greeting, space when he clearly wanted it. He never responded. He never met her eyes. But he didn't leave. That was something. The other children began to shift, little by little. Cassidy would glance at Molly with something like curiosity when she read books aloud, though she still never spoke. Dexter began to trust her enough to ask for extra graph paper. But Emery was a wall. One afternoon, Molly set up a writing station, encouraging the kids to create stories. She told them they could write about anything, real or imaginary, and no one else had to see it if they didn't want to. Emery ignored the paper, arms still crossed, staring at the door. But Cassidy tentatively took a pencil and wrote a single word: rabbit. Dexter scribbled an equation on his sheet, muttering about how math was the only language worth speaking. Molly praised them both, but inside, her heart ached. That evening, as she packed up to leave, she noticed something on Emery's desk: a torn scrap of paper, scribbled on in jagged block letters. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. "I don't trust you. Don't try to save me." Molly swallowed hard. She slipped the note into her pocket and whispered to the empty classroom, "I won't stop trying, Emery, even if you hate me for it." The next day, she brought in a new book, a story about a boy who built a paper boat and sailed it away from the darkness. She placed it on Emery's desk without a word, then started class as usual. She saw him look at it, scowl, and shove it aside. But during recess, when he thought she wasn't looking, he tucked it into his backpack. Molly exhaled, a tiny hope flaring in her chest. It was a start, a crack in the wall. She would keep showing up. She would keep listening. And maybe one day, Emery Brooks would let her back in. Every morning, Molly arrived early to room 7. She opened the windows, letting in the soft morning breeze, arranged the desks in a gentle curve instead of rigid rows, and placed fresh pencils in a small cup by the door. It was her quiet ritual, a way of telling the children, without words, that this was a safe space, that she was here, and she wasn't going anywhere. Emery still wouldn't speak to her. He sat at his desk, arms folded tightly, eyes fixed on the peeling corner of the bulletin board, as though he could bore a hole through it by sheer force of will. But he was there every day. He listened when she read stories aloud, even if he never looked up. Sometimes she caught him tracing lines in his notebook, though he'd slam it shut if she came too close. The rest of the class was shifting, slowly but surely. Cassidy had started to whisper answers during math, so softly that Molly had to lean close to hear. Dexter no longer tore up worksheets in frustration. Instead, he huffed and muttered under his breath. But he finished them, carefully stacking his papers in a neat pile at the corner of his desk. Molly learned to read the children's moods like weather patterns. Cassidy's hands trembled before she spoke. Dexter bit his pencil erasers to mush when he felt overwhelmed. And Emery's jaw would clench and his shoulders would tense like a coiled spring anytime someone got too close. One rainy afternoon, everything finally cracked open. It was during quiet reading time. Molly had given each child a small book to explore on their own, while soft piano music played in the background. She moved from desk to desk, offering gentle encouragement, when a sudden shout shattered the calm. Dexter had accidentally bumped Emery's desk with his chair while shifting in his seat. Emery leapt up so fast his chair clattered to the floor, his eyes wide with panic. He shoved Dexter so hard the smaller boy stumbled back and crashed into the bookshelf, books tumbling down around them. "Don't touch me!" Emery screamed, voice raw and broken. Cassidy let out a soft whimper and ducked under her desk. May froze, clutching her bead jars, beads spilling and bouncing across the floor. Molly's heart raced. Every instinct told her to rush in, to grab Emery, to stop the chaos. But Larson's words rang in her mind again. "Don't cage them. Meet them where they are." She took a slow step forward, her hands open. "Emery," she said softly, steady, despite the trembling in her chest. "It's okay. No one here is going to hurt you. You're safe." "Stay away," he shouted, tears spilling down his cheeks. He grabbed a thick textbook from the shelf and held it out like a shield. Molly kept her voice calm, low. "I see you, Emery. I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to take that book away. You can hold it. You can protect yourself if you need to. That's okay." He blinked, startled, as though the script in his head had suddenly broken. She inched a little closer, still speaking gently. You don't have to fight us here. You can sit, you can breathe, and I'll stay right here until you're ready." Emery trembled, his arms shaking with the effort of holding the book. Then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he dropped it. He sank to the floor, curling into a ball, sobs racking his small frame. Molly lowered herself beside him, careful not to touch him, just sitting close enough so he could feel she was there. The room was silent except for the soft, broken sound of his crying. After a few minutes, she whispered, "I'm proud of you for letting it out. I know how hard that is." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away when she gently pushed a tissue across the floor to him. The rest of the class watched, wide-eyed, waiting. Molly glanced around and spoke softly. "It's okay, everyone. Sometimes we get scared. Sometimes we need to cry. That's part of being here, part of being safe." Slowly, Cassidy crawled out from under her desk and sat back in her chair. Dexter crossed his arms but didn't speak, his gaze darting between Molly and Emery. That night, after the children had gone home, Molly stayed late, cleaning up the scattered books and beads, her body aching with exhaustion. She found the crumpled tissue Emery had left on the floor and held it in her hand for a long time, as though it were something sacred. He had let her in, even just a little, and she had held the door open. She didn't know how long it would take for him to trust her completely, or if he ever would. But she had seen the crack in his armor, the place where the light could get in, and that was enough. When she finally turned out the lights and stepped into the dark hallway, Molly whispered into the silence, "I'm not leaving you, Emery. I'm not leaving any of you." The words echoed back to her, as though the walls themselves had heard and believed. Over the next few weeks, something fragile and new began to bloom in Room 7. Molly kept her promise. She never left, never raised her voice, never forced the children to speak or share before they were ready. Instead, she created small moments of safety, little routines that built trust like bricks laid carefully into a wall. Every morning, she greeted each child at the door by name. "Good morning, Cassidy. I'm glad you're here. Good morning, Dexter. Your shirt is so bright today." Even Emery, who would scowl and brush past her without answering, received the same soft greeting. During lessons, she introduced quiet signals, so the children wouldn't feel startled by loud sounds. A small chime instead of a bell. Gentle transitions between activities. She read stories about characters who faced fear, loneliness, and anger, and found ways to heal. She never singled Emery out, never asked him to participate, but every now and then she caught him watching her with a guarded, uncertain expression. Then one Thursday morning, as she set out fresh paper and pencils for the daily writing prompt, Emery did something that made Molly's breath catch in her throat. He raised his hand. It was a tiny gesture, shaky and unsure, but it was there. Molly swallowed hard, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Yes, Emery?" He didn't look at her. He stared at the blank page on his desk. His voice was hoarse. "Can I write about what happened before?" Cassidy looked up sharply from her own paper. Dexter froze, pencil halfway to the page. Molly kept her expression calm, even as her heart pounded in her chest. "Of course," she said softly. "You can write whatever you want. This is your story." Emery bent over his paper so far, his shaggy hair covered his face. He gripped the pencil so hard Molly worried it would snap. The room fell into an almost reverent silence as he began to write. Molly moved quietly among the desks, helping other children with spelling, offering gentle encouragement, but her eyes kept flicking back to Emery. He didn't stop. He wrote and wrote, his shoulders trembling, breath coming in small gasps. When writing time ended, she didn't collect his paper. She simply said, "You can keep it, Emery, or if you want me to see it, you can leave it on my desk." He didn't answer. He just shoved the paper into his backpack and hunched over his desk, staring at the floor. Later that day, during recess, Molly stayed behind to clean up. As she sorted through the leftover crayons and scraps of paper, she noticed something on her desk. A folded sheet of notebook paper with jagged edges. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. In thick, blocky letters, Emery had written, "He left me there, in the dark. He said I was nothing. I was so cold. I wanted someone to come, but no one did. Until you." Tears filled Molly's eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest and whispered, "I see you, Emery. I'm here." That afternoon, when the children returned from recess, Emery wouldn't meet her gaze, but as he passed her desk, he whispered so quietly she almost missed it. "Thank you." Molly swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled. "You're welcome," she whispered back. Word spread quickly through the small school that something was changing in Room 7. Children who had once been labeled hopeless or disruptive were now reading out loud in class, helping each other with puzzles, raising their hands to answer questions. Cassidy began to speak more, her soft voice growing stronger each day. Dexter started tutoring the younger kids in math during free time, beaming when they called him the Numbers King. But with change came scrutiny. One morning, as Molly prepared materials for a new science project, she was called to the office. Larson stood by the window, arms folded, jaw tight. Molly felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his face a mix of anger and something like sadness. "We have a problem. A parent filed a complaint with the district. They think your methods are unprofessional, that you're acting more like a therapist than a teacher." Molly's hands went cold. "Who?" "Daryl Doggart," Larson said bitterly. "He says you're brainwashing the kids, digging into their past trauma without a license. He wants the district to investigate." Molly's throat tightened. "I'm just trying to help them. They need someone to listen." "I know that," Larson said, his voice softening. "I told the district that. But they're sending a review committee next week. They want to observe your class. Molly, you need to be prepared." Her mind spun. After everything, after Emery had finally trusted her enough to open the door, after Cassidy had found her voice, after Dexter had learned to breathe instead of explode, it could all be taken away. Larson put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll fight this." "You're not alone, Molly." She nodded numbly, blinking back tears. That night, as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at Emery's note, Molly felt something harden inside her. They had tried to break her before. They had tried to tell her she was too soft, too weak, too emotional. But she had learned something in room 7. Strength wasn't in raising your voice or slamming your fist on the table. It was in staying, day after day, even when you were scared, even when the world tried to push you out. She would fight, not just for herself, but for every child in that room. They deserved a place where someone stayed, where someone listened. She would be that someone, no matter what it cost. The day the district committee arrived, the entire school seemed to hold its breath. Molly woke before dawn, her hands shaking as she buttoned her plain blue blouse, the same one she had worn for interviews so many years ago. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, practicing a calm smile that felt like a thin mask stretched over the roiling storm inside her. When she arrived at Sunrise Elementary, she saw Larson waiting by the front doors, his face pale but resolute. He squeezed her shoulder gently. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "I'm proud of you." Molly nodded, too afraid to trust her voice. 3 people from the district arrived a few minutes later. A tall man with wire-rimmed glasses named Mr. Ellington, a severe-looking woman with short gray hair named Ms. Pratt, and a younger woman with a polite, tense smile named Lydia. They introduced themselves briskly, barely looking at Molly as they followed her down the hall toward room 7. Inside, the children were already seated, fidgeting nervously. Cassidy clutched her stuffed rabbit tight against her chest. Dexter stared at the floor, tapping his pencil so hard against his desk that the eraser cracked. Emery sat stiff and silent in the back corner, eyes narrowed at the strangers trailing behind Molly. She cleared her throat and forced her voice steady. "Good morning, everyone. Today we have some visitors who are going to watch us learn and work together. Remember, just be yourselves." Miss Pratt pulled out a clipboard and began scribbling notes immediately. Mr. Ellington settled into a chair by the window, arms folded, eyes narrowed with scrutiny. Lydia offered a small smile to the class, but it looked strained, uncertain. Molly began the lesson, moving into a reading activity she had carefully planned. A story about a small bird finding its way home after a storm. She chose it deliberately, hoping the committee would see the gentle way her students explored fear, hope, and courage through the characters. Cassidy raised her hand tentatively to answer a question about the story. Her voice trembled, but she managed a full sentence. Molly beamed at her, gently encouraging her to continue. Dexter, still scowling, nevertheless muttered an answer about how the bird probably needed to learn to trust its wings. But the committee seemed unimpressed. Molly saw Ms. Pratt make a note every time she offered Cassidy a gentle word, every time she let Dexter speak out of turn without reprimanding him. At one point, when Emery shifted uncomfortably in his seat and mumbled that he didn't want to read aloud, Mr. Ellington leaned forward. "Why aren't you encouraging him to participate?" he asked sharply. Molly swallowed, keeping her tone even. "Because forcing him to speak before he's ready would break the trust we've built. He'll speak when he's ready." Mr. Ellington sniffed, clearly unimpressed, and scribbled something on his pad. As the morning wore on, Molly felt her confidence waver. Every tiny choice she made, offering Cassidy extra time, letting Dexter work out a math problem on the board, even though it wasn't technically math time. Allowing Emery to doodle quietly instead of reading was marked and noted by the committee. When the children left for lunch, the room fell silent. Molly felt the weight of the committee's gaze, like a physical force pressing on her chest. Ms. Pratt spoke first. Ms. Gaynor, we're concerned that your classroom lacks clear discipline structure. You allow students to dictate the pace of lessons. You blur the lines between educator and therapist, which is not your role here. Molly opened her mouth, but no words came. Larson, who had slipped into the room quietly a few minutes earlier, stepped forward. With all due respect, he said firmly, this classroom has transformed students others gave up on. You can't measure progress with checklists alone. Ms. Pratt raised an eyebrow. We will note your input, Mr. Trial, but we're concerned about boundary issues and the lack of standardization in Ms. Gaynor's methods. Larson clenched his jaw, but said nothing more. The rest of the day was a blur. The committee observed again during afternoon writing time, watching as Molly encouraged the children to share their stories if they wanted, or to keep them private if they preferred. She saw Ms. Pratt frown each time she praised a student for sharing something personal. Finally, at the end of the day, the committee left. Molly watched them go, her stomach twisted in knots. Larson lingered in the doorway, watching her clean up the stray pencils and papers, his eyes dark with worry. They don't understand, he muttered. They think everything can be measured with charts and graphs. They didn't see the fear in Emery's eyes disappear when you told him he didn't have to speak. They didn't see Cassidy sit a little taller when you praised her answer. Molly sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "Now, what if it's not enough?" she whispered. "What if they shut us down? What if they take this away?" Larson crouched beside her, gently pulling her hands away. "Then we fight," he said. "We show them the truth. We show them the children." The next morning, Molly arrived early again, exhaustion pulling at her bones. She opened the door to room 7 and froze. Sitting on her desk was a stack of folded papers, dozens of them. She picked one up, her hands trembling. In shaky, careful letters, it read, "She made me feel safe for the first time ever." Another said, "I used to hate school. Now I want to come every day because Ms. Gaynor listens to me." A third, written in Dexter's messy scrawl, "She taught me how to breathe when I want to break stuff. No one else ever taught me that." There were dozens more, all written by her students. Cassidy, Dexter, May, even Emery. They had written letters, pouring out their small hearts onto paper, telling the truth of what Molly had given them. She felt tears spill over as she flipped through them, clutching them to her chest. She looked up to see Larson standing in the doorway, a small smile on his face. "They wanted to help you," he said quietly. "I didn't tell them to do it. They did it themselves." Molly's voice shook. "I don't know what's going to happen next." "Whatever it is," Larson said, stepping forward to place a hand on her shoulder, "you're not facing it alone." Molly nodded, wiping her eyes. Then, she squared her shoulders, looking around the small room filled with bright posters, messy desks, and silent echoes of laughter and pain and hope. She would fight for these children, for their right to have a place where someone stayed, where someone listened. And this time, she knew. She wasn't alone. A week later, the district called a meeting at Sunrise Elementary to deliver their decision. Molly barely slept the night before, her mind replaying every moment from the past year. Emery's first scribbled note, Cassidy's trembling voice, Dexter's tentative grin when he got a math problem right. She kept the children's letters folded in her pocket like a shield. Larson met her outside the office, his face tight with worry. He squeezed her hand once, then opened the door. Inside sat the same 3 committee members, their folders stacked neatly before them. Ms. Pratt cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Gaynor. We've reviewed your classroom, your methods, and the numerous concerns raised by a parent." Molly gripped the arms of her chair so hard her fingers ached. Mr. Ellington continued, his voice flat and bureaucratic. "We do find elements of your teaching style unconventional. And frankly, some of us questioned whether you were crossing boundaries, better left to professional counselors." Molly's breath caught in her throat. "But," he continued, glancing briefly at Lydia, who gave the smallest nod, "we also received overwhelming testimony from your students and their guardians. We read every letter. We watched the video statements Principal Trial provided." Molly shot a glance at Larson, who only gave her the tiniest hint of a smile. Ms. Pratt spoke next, her voice less sharp than before. "Ms. Gaynor, We see that your classroom has become a place of safety and growth for children who might otherwise fall through the cracks. While your methods are unorthodox, we cannot deny the measurable progress these students have made under your care. She set down her pen and folded her hands. Therefore, we will not recommend any disciplinary action. In fact, we'd like to invite you to participate in a pilot program with other resource teachers, sharing some of the approaches you've developed. Molly blinked, stunned. I I don't understand. You're letting me stay? Yes, Ms. Pratt said simply. But we do expect you to work with our support staff, including licensed counselors, when addressing deeper emotional issues. Are you willing to do that? Molly nodded so quickly her vision blurred with tears. Yes, absolutely. Then that concludes this matter, Mr. Ellington said briskly. Good day, Ms. Gaynor. As they stood to leave, Lydia paused by Molly's chair. Her voice was soft. For what it's worth, she murmured, I think you saved those kids. Don't stop. When the committee was gone, Molly buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Larson wrapped his arms around her, whispering, You did it. You fought for them. And you won. That afternoon, Molly walked back into room 7 with her heart lighter than it had been in months. The children looked up from their work as she entered. Dexter was the first to speak, his voice unusually soft. Are you staying? Molly smiled, wiping her eyes. I'm staying, she whispered. A cheer broke out so loud she thought the walls might crack. Cassidy jumped from her seat, running forward to hug Molly tightly around the waist, her rabbit crushed between them. Emery didn't move, but she saw him looking at her, something soft and shining in his eyes. Later, as the day ended, Emery lingered by the door. Ms. Gaynor, he said, his voice small. Yes, Emery. He swallowed hard, his fingers twisting in the straps of his backpack. I wrote something. For you. He handed her a crumpled piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly. You didn't leave. You stayed. You didn't give up even when I wanted you to. You're the first person who didn't give up on me. That means I can try not to give up too. She pressed the note to her chest, tears spilling freely now. Thank you, Emery, she whispered. That means more than you'll ever know. He nodded once, then darted away, his head ducked. But Molly saw the faint smile he tried to hide. That evening, as the sun set over the little brick school, Larson walked with her out to the parking lot. He slipped his hand into hers, and together they watched the sky turn pink and gold. You changed everything here, he whispered. Molly shook her head, smiling through tears. No, we did. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm so glad you stayed. She looked back at the building, the windows glowing softly in the fading light. In those walls were children who had learned to trust, to hope, to breathe again. And for the first time in a long time, Molly believed that maybe, just maybe, she had saved herself too. I think this ending beautifully shows how real change doesn't come from authority or policy, but from one person choosing to stay, choosing to care, even when the system tries to push them out. Molly's fight isn't just for her students. It's also for her own belief that compassion and patience matter more than any set of rules. In the end, she wins, not because the district agrees with her methods, but because the children's voices become undeniable proof of her impact. That's what makes this finale so powerful. It's a testament to the quiet strength of a teacher's love, and the way that love can heal not only broken children, but a wounded teacher's own heart.